I saw in a French newspaper today that a Corsican nationalist group has said in public that if in response to these terror attacks on the continent, they said that if one of these Muslim groups should by any chance attack one from their people, these Corsicans, this nationalist group, is going to respond with force, with weapons. And this reminds me of something. Actually, it reminds me of two things. First of all, it reminds me of prison. Because when I was in prison, and we had Muslims in our block, if you treated them well, they would treat you like shit. So, after a while, all the Norwegians understood that the only way to be treated well by these guys was to treat them like shit. You had to never, ever let them come ahead of you in line. You had to push them, physically just push them out of the way if you walked past them. And you had to behave like a complete asshole, because that was the only thing they respected. They respected force or the threat of force. Nothing else. If you were kind to them, they would walk all over you. If you did any favors for them, they would treat you like their slave. So, the second thing this reminds me of is Lebanon in the 1980s, where you had a lot of Western diplomats and businessmen who were kidnapped by different Muslim groups. And the US diplomacy was working on overdrive to get them out, and the British and the French, all these different Western governments were doing their best to have their citizens released. And it took ages. They were stuck there for several years. They were kidnapped and they were kept hostage or a prisoner in some shitty apartment in Lebanon for several years. And then one of these clever Muslim groups kidnapped a Russian diplomat, or rather a Soviet diplomat. And the KGB knew perfectly well who had done this. They identified them. So they took one of these guys in his own home and they cut his head off. They took the head of this Muslim guy, put it in the bag, and then they went to the mosque that they knew this particular group had some association with. Then they took the bag and they put it in front of the imam, and they told him, if our diplomat is not released ASAP, the rest of your group is going to end up like this. Have a nice day. And then they went. And of course, the Russian diplomat, he wasn't stuck in some shitty apartment for years. He was released after a few hours. That's how it works. When you see all these Western politicians and Western diplomats relate to these Muslim terrorists as if they were like us, then you know that you are dealing with idiots, that our governments are idiots and are sending idiots to deal with them. The Muslims in question are like the criminal Muslims in prison. I'm not saying all Muslims are like that, but I'm saying that Muslim terrorists and Muslim criminals are like that. They only respect force or the threat of force. If you try to talk to them, they will take it as a sign of weakness. If you try to bargain with them, if you try to do them a favor, if you do anything for them, they will take it as a sign of weakness, and they will treat you accordingly. And I can add that the Soviets never had any problems again with Soviet diplomats or businessmen or others being kidnapped in Lebanon ever after. They solved the problem like this, or rather like this. And that's reality. That's That's how this world works, or rather that's how it works in parts of this world. And I can also add to those who welcome the refugees to our countries that this is how it's going to be in our part of the world as well. Because when we bring them here, we bring their mentality, we bring their culture, and we bring their way of doing things.